Hi, I'm Esin, and I review stuff. And welcome back to Metal Monday, where I talk about albums that I recommend you listen to so you can start your week off right. As 2020 is racing towards a suitably brutal close in terms of the albums that are recently coming out and will be coming out in the following months, I wanted to talk about an album that I meant to get to a lot sooner but just couldn't due to other things getting in the way, which is kind of the story of my life. Meant to get to that album, but shit just happened. The album that I am talking about is the sophomore release of a South Dakota death metal band. This is Angerot's Apostate. Angerot actually made a splash on the scene when they first came out in 2018 with their debut record, The Splendid Iniquity, and just 2 years later they decided to drop something new. And far as this album is concerned, I think the relevant question is sophomore slump? What sophomore slump? Let's start with the brass tacks, shall we? What's waiting for you in the Apostate is 36 minutes of dark, heavy, moody death metal that more often than not also takes cues from black metal and the Swedish tradition of death metal. What this translates to in terms of the music is really burly but at times really heavy and groovy death riffs laid on top of thick, angry bass, really throaty death growls, and furious, pounding, sturdy drums. Actually, come to think of it, sturdy is the operative word where this album is concerned. The Apostate doesn't so much stride or march or charge forward as it takes lumbering, lurching steps that are extremely calculated and, as a result, extremely firm. What this translates to in terms of songwriting is fewer riffs on average than you might be hearing on other albums of the same genre. The Apostate isn't the type of album where you're going to be hearing 100 riffs per song. In point of fact, I think Angerot's approach can best be summed as less is more. Most of the songs on this album feature one central riff that serves as the linchpin that holds the rest of the song together. Whatever other passages are included within the song emerge from that riff. It's sort of like branches coming out of the main trunk of a tree, but in this case, no matter how many branches come out, the songs always seem to take a little bit of a U-turn and return to the riffs that they started from. This type of semicircular songwriting actually has two distinctive advantages. The first is that when you are writing songs in this manner, since the arrangements are kept extremely tight and confined within a certain area, so to speak, you don't really have the luxury of going off in disparate or completely unrelated directions, and as a result of this, the arrangements remain tight as hell. The second and more important advantage of writing songs in this manner that Angerot milked to its fullest potential is the fact that when you are exploring rather few number of riffs, you have ample time to explore them to their fullest. Now, this might have turned into a disadvantage if the riffs written by Angerot consistently across this whole album weren't instantly memorable and extremely tasteful. The band's skills in songwriting aside, songwriting itself cannot really save your album if you cannot write a good riff. Luckily, this is an area in which Angerot excels. Even at cursory listens, you are not going to have any difficulty separating the songs from one another, except for one point which I'm going to get to later. However, all this shouldn't be taken as an indication that the Apostate isn't a varied album. Quite to the contrary, the album is vastly varied, both within the songs themselves and across the track list. Case in point, the opening track, Below the Deep and Dreamless Sleep, opens up with clean guitar tones and a choir section which deceptively leads the audience into thinking that maybe the proceedings are going to have a lot more symphonic elements than death, which couldn't be further from the truth. What immediately follows this soft-spoken intro is a heavy, crushing death groove that starts out pretty mid-tempo before evolving into a sweet death-like passage bridge, which then makes the transition into black metal territories before turning back and coming back to the start again. Apart from the final two tracks, Father Mentor and Thy Kingdom Burn, both of which are unapologetic love letters to the Swedish tradition of death metal, and as a result are far more consistent in their overall tempo and mood than the other tracks on this album, most of the songs on the Divine Apostate feature similar bait and switch tactics and tempo shifts to keep things interesting. Two examples of these types of tactics being used to their absolute fullest potential would be on the tracks Coalesced with Wickedness and Council of the Ungodly. Coalesced with Wickedness starts out with a very slow, very muscle-bound, heavy-set death groove before transitioning into almost black metal-like territories by pulling out a blast beat and introducing really crushing riffs into the mix. At this point in the song, the band also decides to bring back the choirs that they had teased at the beginning of the opening track but hadn't used since. The band goes back and forth with these two passages until they hit the bridge, which is a rather soft-spoken spoken word type of transition into a very tasteful solo section. Taking your audience from just vibing with death grooves to being absolutely pummeled by the suddenly vicious and furious black metal passages, and making the transition between these and from these to the spoken word softer bridge section is no mean feat, which is a testament to the songwriting skills of the band. Like, it takes a lot to make a shift like that not seem abrupt and to make it fit the scheme of the song, and Angerot somehow manages to do this. As for the second example that I have used, Council of the Ungodly, this track stands as a testament to how, if you are skillful enough in what you do, you don't really need all the bells and whistles that some bands seem intent on using to create a sinister, dark, and foreboding atmosphere. Starting out from an almost slam death-like slow groove and gradually evolving this into a seriously moody track, Council of the Ungodly manages to thrive by the aura that it builds, which is tense and, like I just said, sinister. This is also the point where I think it is revealed why Angerot didn't use the choral or more symphonic elements more prominently in their arrangements. It is because they have zero need of them whatsoever. They are able to create with their basic instruments, the guitars, bass, drums, and vocals, a positively insidious atmosphere just by the strength of their riffs and their skills in songwriting, which is where, if I had a hat, it would come off to the band. Speaking of which, I am just this tiny bit disappointed though that the album decides to end on the left-right two-punch of Father Mentor and Thy Kingdom Burn, the second of which, Thy Kingdom Burn, actually feels more or less like a continuation of Father Mentor, and both these tracks, when stacked up against each other, sort of bleed into one another. However, this is a very personal gripe to start, and secondly, this doesn't really detract from how the album decides to close, mainly because although they do transition into one another almost seamlessly to the point where I think these two might have been an individual track at one point, the amount of skill put forward and the fun, like I said, unapologetic approach in bringing together sweet death influences is much welcome. Not to mention the fact that Thy Kingdom Burned actually ends with the choirs that started the album sort of functioning as a bookend to the end of this. So even though Angerot did not go for the big finish as some bands do, and the big finish I do love very much, I am not hating on how this album ends at all. Production-wise, the Divine Apostate manages to strike a nice balance between being murky and raw enough and between being well produced enough. They don't slide into the ever-present trap of being overly brick-walled, which is something that claims many a death metal band every single year and more each passing year. So thankfully the production retains a breathing room, or at least enough of a breathing room to take things easy on the listener. The drums hit true, the bass sits nicely underneath the guitars are prominent, the vocals sit where they should, And as an added bonus, the choral elements, when they are brought to the fore, do not overshadow the other instruments, and in point of fact, fit with the other instruments so well that if Angerot decided to head in a slightly more symphonic direction, they very well could have without having to redo the entire production process all over again. Actually, the production benefits the band greatly by helping them build the moodiness of the album that I have mentioned at the beginning of this review, in that the way this album is produced, the way it sounds, contributes greatly to building the atmosphere that easily envelops the listener. So, if Apostasy is divine, fucking sign me up is what I'm saying. So all in all, Angerot's The Divine Apostate isn't just an album that is well worth a listen, it is an album that you definitely should listen, as it is one of the best death metal albums to come out in 2020. And coming from such a fledgling young band with just one other album under their belt, this is impressive. And if this is an indication as to where the band will be heading to next, I am very excited to see what they're gonna do. There'll be a Bandcamp link in the description of this video to this album, so why don't you click that and go listen to it, and if you have already listened to it, let me know what you thought about it. If you like my content, please like, comment, and subscribe, as it always helps a lot. But until next time, hope you have a great week. It's Sin. Peace out.